Bhakti Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, Part 2. Bhakti Yoga is in public domain. Note: from here on, whenever Brahma will be said, will refer to the Supreme Self, the most powerful, omnipresent, eternal God, which is formless and beyond space, time, and causation. It will not be referring to the God Brahma, which is shown on lotus and knower of Vedas. Bhakti Yoga, Part 2, recording by Vineet. The philosophy of Ishvara. Who is Ishvara? Janmadasya Yatha, from whom is the birth, continuation, and dissolution of the universe. He is Ishvara, the eternal, the pure, the ever free, the almighty, the all knowing, the all merciful, and the teacher of all teachers. Above all, Sah Ishvara Ani Vachanya Prem Swarup. He, the Lord, is of his own nature, inexpressible love. These certainly are the definitions of a personal God. Are there then two gods? The not this, the Satchit Anand, the existence, knowledge, bliss of the philosopher, and this God of love of the Bhakta? No, it is the same Sachidanand, who is also the God of love, the impersonal and personal in one. It has always to be understood that the personal God worshipped by the Bhakta is not separate or different from the Brahma. All is Brahma, the one without a second, only the Brahma, as unity or absolute, is too much of an abstraction to be loved and worshipped. So the Bhakta chooses the relative aspect of Brahma, that is, Ishvara, the supreme ruler. To use a simile, Brahma is as the clay or substance out of which an infinite variety of articles are fashioned. As clay, they are all one, but form or manifestation differentiates them. Before every one of them was made, they all existed potentially in the clay. And of course, they are identical substantially. But when formed, and so long as the form remains, they are separate and different. The clay mouse can never become a clay elephant because, as manifestations, form alone makes them what they are, though as unformed clay they are all one. Ishvara is the highest manifestation of the absolute reality, or in other words, the highest possible reading of the absolute by the human mind. Creation is eternal, and so also is Ishvara. In the fourth pada, or the fourth chapter of his sutras, after stating the almost infinite power and knowledge which will come to the liberated soul after the attainment of moksha, Vyasa makes the remark in an aphorism that none, however, will get the power of creating, ruling, and dissolving the universe because that belongs to God alone. In explaining the sutra, it is easy for the dualistic commentators to show how it is ever impossible for a subordinate soul, Jeev, to have the infinite power and total independence of God. The thorough dualistic commentator Madhvacharya deals with this passage in his usual summary method by quoting a verse from the Varaha Purana. In explaining this aphorism, the commentator Ramanuja says, this doubt being raised whether among the powers of the liberated souls is included that unique power of the Supreme One, that is, of creation, etc., of the universe, and even the lordship of all, or whether without that the glory of the liberated consists only in the direct perception of the Supreme One. We get as an argument the following. It is reasonable that the liberated get the lordship of the universe because the scripture says, quoting, he attains to extreme sameness with the Supreme One and all his desires are realized. Now, extreme sameness and realization of all desires cannot be attained without the unique power of the Supreme Lord, namely that of governing the universe. Therefore, to attain the realization of all desires and the extreme sameness with the Supreme, we must all admit that the liberated get the power of ruling the whole universe. To this, we reply that the liberated get all the powers except that of ruling the universe. Ruling the universe is guiding the form and the life and the desires of all the sentient and the non sentient beings, the liberated ones from whom all that wheels His true nature has been removed. Only enjoy the unobstructed perception of the Brahma, but do not possess the power of ruling the universe. This is proved from the scriptural text, quoting, "From whom all these things are born, by whom all that are born live, unto whom they, departing, return, ask about it. That is Brahma." If this quality of ruling the universe be a quality common even to the liberated, then this text would not apply as a definition to Brahma, defining him through his rulership of the universe. The uncommon attributes alone define a thing. Therefore, in text like "My beloved boy alone, in the beginning there existed the one without a second, that saw and felt, I will give birth to the many," that projected heat. Brahma indeed alone existed in the beginning, that one evolved, that projected a blessed form, the Shatra. All these gods are Shatras: Varuna, Soma, Rudra, Prajanya, Yama, Mrityu, Ishana. Atman existed alone in the beginning. Nothing else vibrated. He thought of projecting the world. He projected the world after. Alone Narayana existed. Neither Brahma, nor Ishana, nor the Divya Prithvi, nor the stars, nor water, nor fire, nor Soma, nor the sun. He did not take pleasure alone. He, after his meditation, had one daughter, the 10 organs, etc. And in others, as who living in the earth is separate from the earth, who living in the Atman, etc. The Shrutis speak of the Supreme One as the subject of work of ruling the universe. Nor in these descriptions of the ruling of universe is there any position for the liberated soul, by which such a soul may have the ruling of the universe ascribed to it. In explaining the next sutra, Ramanuja says, quoting, "If you say it is not so because there are direct texts in the Vedas in evidence to the contrary, these texts refer to the glory of the liberated in the spheres of the subordinate deities. This also is an easy solution of the difficulty. Although the system of Ramanuja admits the unity of the total, within that totality of existence there are, according to him, eternal differences. Therefore, for all practical purposes, this system also being dualistic, it was easy for Ramanuja to keep the distinction between the personal soul and the personal God very clear." We shall now try to understand what the great representative of the Advaita society school has to say on the point. We shall see how the Advaita system maintains all the hopes and aspirations of the dualistic intact, and at the same time propounds its own solution of the problem in consonance with the high destiny of divine humanity. Those who aspire to retain their individual mind even after liberation and to remain distinct will have ample opportunity for realizing their aspirations and enjoying the blessing of the qualified Brahma. These are they who have been spoken of in the Bhagavad Puran. Thus, quoting, "O king, such are the glorious qualities of the Lord that the sages whose only pleasure is in the self, and from whom all fetters have fallen off, even they love the omnipresent with the love that is for love's sake. These are they who are spoken of by the Sakhyas as getting merged in nature in this cycle, so that after attaining perfection they may come out in the next as lords of world system. But none of these ever become equal to God, Ishvara. Those who attain to that state where there is neither creation nor created nor creator, where there is neither knower nor knowable nor knowledge, where there is neither I nor thou nor he, where there is neither subject nor object nor relation, there who is seen by whom. Such persons have gone beyond everything to where words cannot go nor mind, born to that which the Shrutis declare as not this, not this. But for those who cannot or will not reach this state, there will inevitably remain the triune vision of the one undifferentiated Brahma as nature, soul, and the interpenetrating sustainer of both, Ishvara. So when Prahlad forgot himself, he found neither the universe nor its causes. All was to him one infinite, undifferentiated by name and form. But as soon as he remembered that he was Prahlad, there was the universe before him, and with it, the Lord of the universe, the repository of an infinite number of blessed qualities. So it was with the blessed gopis. So long as they had lost sense of their own personal identity and individuality, they were all Krishna's. And when they began again to think of him as the one to be worshipped, then they were gopis again. And immediately, quoting, onto them appeared Krishna with a smile on his lotus face, clad in yellow robes and having garlands on, the embodied conqueror in beauty of the god of love. Now to go back to our Acharya Shankara, those, he says, who by worshipping the qualified Brahma attain conjunction with the supreme ruler, preserving their own mind, is their glory limited or unlimited? This doubt arising, we get as an argument. The glory should be unlimited because of the scriptural text quoting, they attain their own kingdom. To him, all the gods offer worship. Their desires are fulfilled in all the worlds. As an answer to this, Vyasa writes, without the power of ruling the universe, bearing the power of creation, etc., of the universe, the other powers such as anima, etc., are acquired by the liberated. As to ruling the universe, that belongs to the eternally perfect Ishvara. Why? Because he is the subject of all the scriptural texts as regards creation, etc., and the liberated souls are not mentioned therein in any connection whatsoever. The Supreme Lord indeed is alone engaged in ruling the universe. The texts as to creation, etc., all point to him. Beside, there is given the adjective ever perfect. Also, the scriptures say that the powers, anima, etc., of the others are from the search after and the worship of God. Therefore, they have no place in the ruling of the universe. Again, on account of their possessing their own minds, it is possible that their wills may differ, and that whilst one desires creation, another may desire destruction. The only way of avoiding this conflict is to make all wills subordinate to some one will. Therefore, the conclusion is that the wills of the liberated are dependent upon the will of the supreme ruler. Bhakti then can be directed towards Brahma only in his personal aspect. The way is more difficult for those whose mind is attached to the absolute. Bhakti has to float on smoothly with the current of our nature. True it is that we cannot have any idea of the Brahma which is not anthropomorphic, but is it not equally true of everything we know? The greatest psychologist the world has ever known, Bhagwan Kapila, demonstrated ages ago that human consciousness is one of the elements in the makeup of all the objects of our perception and conception, internal as well as external. Beginning with our bodies and going up to Ishvara, we may see that every object of our perception is this consciousness plus something else, whatever that may be. And this unavoidable mixture is what we ordinarily think of as reality. Indeed, it is and will be all of the reality that is possible for the human mind to know. Therefore, to say that Ishvara is unreal because he is because he is anthropomorphic is sheer nonsense. It sounds very much like the Occidental squabble on idealism and realism, which fearful looking quarrel has for its foundation a mere play on the word real. The idea of Ishvara covers all the ground ever denoted, the connoted by the word real, and the Ishwar is as real as anything else in the universe, and after all, the word real means nothing more than what has now been pointed out. Such is our philosophical conception of Ishvara. Spiritual realization, the aim of Bhakti Yoga. To the Bhakta, these dry details are necessary only to strengthen his will. Beyond that, they are of no use to him, for he is treading on a path which is fitted very soon to lead him beyond the hazy and turbulent regions of reason, to lead him to the realm of realization. He soon, through the mercy of the Lord, reaches a plane where pedantic and powerless reason is left far behind, and the mere intellectual groping through the dark gives place to the daylight of direct perception. He no more reasons and believes, he almost perceives. He no more argues, he senses. And is not this seeing God and feeling God and enjoying God higher than everything else? Nah. Bhaktas have not been wanting who has maintained that it is higher than even moksha, liberation. And is it not also the highest utility? There are people, and a good many of them too, in the world who are convinced that only that is of use and utility which brings to man creature comforts. Even religion, God, eternity, soul, none of these is of any use to them, as they do not bring them money or physical comfort. To such, all those things who do not go to gratify the senses and appease the appetites are of no utility. Every mind utility, however, is conditioned by its own peculiar wants. To men, therefore, who never rise higher than eating, drinking, begetting progeny, and dying, the only gain is in sense enjoyments, and they must wait and go through many more births and reincarnations to learn to feel even the faintest necessity for anything higher. But those to whom the eternal interest of the soul are of much higher value than the fleeting interest of this mundane life, to whom the gratification of the senses is but like the thoughtless play of the baby, to them God and the love of God form the highest and the only utility of human existence. Thank God, there are some still alive in this world of too much worldliness. Bhakti Yoga, as we have said, is divided into the Gauni and the preparatory, and the Para, or the supreme forms. We shall find as we go on how, in the preparatory stage, we unavoidably stand in need of many concrete helps to enable us to get on. And indeed, the mythological and symbological parts of all religions are natural growths which early environ the aspiring soul and help it Godward. It is also significant fact that spiritual giants have been produced only in those systems of religion where there is an exuberant growth of rich mythology and ritualism. The dry, fanatical forms of religion which attempt to eradicate all that is poetical, all that is beautiful and sublime, all that gives a firm grasp to the infant mind, tottering in its Godward way, the forms which attempt to break down the very rich poles of the spiritual roof and in their ignorant and superstitious conceptions of truth try to drive away all that is life giving, all that furnishes the formative material to the spiritual plant growing in the human soul. Such forms of religion too soon find that all that is left to them is but an empty shell, a contentless frame of words and sophistry, which, with perhaps a little flavor of a kind of social scavengering or the so called spirit of reform. The vast mass of those whose religion is like this are conscious or unconscious materialists, the end and aim of their lives here and hereafter being enjoyment, which indeed is to them the alpha and the omega of human life, and which is this Ishtha work like street cleaning and scavenging, intended for the material comfort of man, is, according to them, the be all and end all of human existence. And the sooner the followers of this curious mixture of ignorance and fanaticism come out in their true colors and join, as they well deserve to do, the ranks of atheists and materialists, the better will it be for the world. 1 ounce of the practice of righteousness and of spiritual self realization outweighs tons and tons of frothy talk and nonsensical sentiments. Show us one, but one, gigantic spiritual genius growing out of all this dry dust of ignorance and fanaticism. And it you cannot close your mouths, open the windows of your hearts to clear light of truth, and sit like children at the feet of those who know what they're talking about, the sages of India. Let us then listen attentively to what they say. Thank you for listening me. Here ends the part 2 of Bhakti Yoga by Swami Vivekananda.